October, I collapsed into a seat on the Coast Starlight, heavily sedated from the bottle of wine I'd guzzled in the bar car, my first stop. I was accustomed to train travel. I'm a nervous flyer, and long train rides are ideal for dedicated drinking. Sitting next to me was another woman traveling alone. Her name was Gaina. I was feeling loose-lipped, so I've offered that I was en route to visit my older half-brother, who lives in Sacramento. My brother was 19 when I was born and already battling addiction. He has long since gotten clean, but this would be our first chance to bond as adults. I was taking a vacation from unemployment in Dallas. I'd been out of college for 3 years, in which time I moved from DC to New York to New Haven and back to Dallas where I grew up. Each move was in pursuit of a guy I was going to marry or to escape a breakup. When I arrived in a new city, I would get a new job, a new apartment, new friends, and a plan for a new me. Thanks to an innocent face and a degree from a good school, which I'd earned with the help of Adderall and sympathetic professors, I always found work when I sought it out. In Dallas, I was hired as an assistant to a book publisher, a good job given my ambitions of being a writer. But after a few months, my conviction that I would take this job seriously waned, and my taste for cheap wine waxed. Miscellaneous professionals nationwide will confirm that 8:45 a.m. is a very unlucky time for me. It's then that I experience car trouble, family emergencies, and suffer from a host of recurring illnesses. I always quit before I was fired, and with each wasted opportunity, my self-loathing increased. I hugged the toilet for hours most mornings, riddled with anxiety about what I'd done or said the night before in a blackout. Had I told a friend's secret for a laugh? Fallen down? Been cut off at the bar? How did I get home? When the anxiety was unbearable, I holed up in my apartment, where there were fewer things to go wrong and no witnesses. I could afford to live alone thanks to an ample savings account, but I was burning through it quickly. I spent many days on the couch, drinking gas station Pinot Noir and watching soap operas. I watched the same episodes repeatedly because, like a goldfish, I couldn't remember what I'd just seen. My place looked like a frat house. Clothes, dirty dishes, and empty bottles everywhere. I was profoundly lonely. I rotated through friends so that no one knew what a wreck I was, and I dodged phone calls from my parents because I'd told them I was sober. After I quit the publisher, I'd volunteered to do 30 days of treatment, and I was afraid to admit it hadn't stuck. I knew I was an alcoholic. That was hard to deny. It was committing to do something about it that I struggled with. So, to abate my loneliness, I turned to online dating. The guys I met online were disposable. Because they were strangers, I could drink without shame, and if I wet the bed or said I love you on the third date, it was no big deal. I would just delete that guy's number and pick up with someone new. I planned the trip to California because of a boy I'd met on a wildly superficial app called Tinder. He lives in San Francisco, and we'd matched when he was in Dallas for a bachelor party. It began with a hookup in the parking lot of Corner Bar. We'd kept in touch, and he'd asked me to visit. I didn't want him to know I was making the trip especially for him, so I turned it into a 10-day tour of California. I'd started the trip seeing friends in LA, where I caught the train that morning. After visiting my brother, I would end with a weekend in San Francisco. As the train progressed north, Gaina shared that her son was hooked on meth, which had been my brother's drug of choice. She told me about her stubborn hope every time he vowed to change, and about her apprehension whenever she prepared to see him. Would he be high? And if so, would he be in a pleasant mood, or would he be aggressive? I thought with painful regret about my unpredictable behavior toward my family. At one recent Christmas, my uncle found me crumpled in the hallway, muttering incoherently and cradling 6 full Budweisers. In college, I discovered that alcohol gave me a sense of control over my feelings that I'd never had before. I'd always been so sensitive to the opinions of others that the tiniest bit of praise or criticism would dictate my mood. In 3rd grade, an award for most improved sent me home in tears. When I drank, I did and said whatever felt good, and I didn't care what anyone thought. It felt like freedom. On the contrary, by the time I was of legal drinking age, I was a slave to the promise of the next drink. It said, just one more, then you'll feel comfortable, then you'll feel safe. That relief rarely came anymore, but in a vicious cycle, I drank simply to forget what I'd done drunk. The train pulled into Sacramento in the wee hours. By this point, I'd confessed my alcoholism to Gaina. As we parted, she pulled me close and with tear-filled eyes whispered, "Don't forget you are fighting an opponent that wants to kill you." I knew she was right, but most days I was more afraid to keep living than I was to die. My brother picked me up in a new car. When he cleaned up, he got a job in IT at a law firm. He drove me to a large house in the suburbs where he lives with his girlfriend of several years. As we turned in, he shared a surprise. He had rented the two of us a cabin in Yosemite for the following evening. I was touched by how he'd embraced this chance for us to connect and ashamed that I'd made him a pit stop on the way to a hookup in San Francisco. The next afternoon, we hiked at Yosemite. On the drive, he told me that he'd first done meth at 17 with a drag queen at a nightclub in Houston. It was hard to reconcile the goofy guy before me who joked to passersby about bears up ahead with the rebel who ran away as a teenager. Where was that person now? Unexpectedly, he'd planted a seed of hope. Perhaps I could have a happy life too. My brother didn't stop me from drinking, but in a rare showing, I kept my shit together. We had a good time. Yosemite was beautiful, and I knew that left to my devices, I would have Instagrammed a few pictures and spent the rest of the time in the bar. I arrived at Tinder guy's doorstep 2 days later. It was awkward from hello, almost like I'd traveled halfway across the country to see a stranger. He was polite and took me for an expensive sandwich. But he initiated goodbyes immediately after, and we've not spoken since. His invitation to visit was not as sincere as I'd thought, and the insanity of what I'd done was apparent. I was mortified and lucky to contact a high school friend who took me in until my flight to Dallas. I continued to drink after California, but I was nagged by a new feeling that with each sip, I was giving up the possibility of redemption. I wanted to want to quit. On Easter, my wish was granted when I woke up at 3 a.m. in the driver's seat of my running car in the parking lot of an El Phoenix. I had no idea why I was there, how I'd gotten there, or how long I'd been there. That morning, I obsessively checked my car for evidence of an accident, convinced that the cops would be arriving to arrest me shortly. There are people who don't have those mornings, and I desperately wanted to be one of them. I began 4 months of rehab the following day. I thought I was irreparably damaged, but with the help of many, I'm being mended. Today I have a good life, and I almost didn't show up for it. I work in a coffee shop, I answer the phone when my parents call, and I remember all of it. Every day I ask, how can I help you? And it helps me not to dwell on myself and what others might think of me. A few Fridays ago, I cheerfully described my plans to go to the gym, cook dinner, and do some writing to a customer. "Wow, sounds boring," he said, and at first I was offended, but after reflecting on the year I've had, I just smiled and said, "Thank you."